This week's episode is a little different. A couple of weeks ago, my father passed away. Between that, preparing for vacation Bible school, and trying to be there for my family, I haven't been able to give a traditional church safety topic the time and attention that it deserves. I thought about postponing the episode, and I thought about putting out a short message explaining why there wouldn't be one. Neither of those felt right. Instead, today I'd like to tell you about the man who had the greatest influence on the man behind the microphone, my father.
If God is for me, who's against me? Nobody is. I'm so sick of the...
Welcome to Sanctuary Peacemakers. This is your frontline guide to safety and security inside houses of worship with your host, Unity. Now, let's enter the crucible of our discussion. Welcome back to Sanctuary Peacemakers. Before we get started, make sure you're following the podcast for new episodes every Thursday. If this episode is helpful, leave a comment, rating, or review, and share it with someone involved in church safety ministry. After my father passed away, I had to do something I'd never done before. I had to write a eulogy. As I sat in front of a blank page, one question kept running through my mind. How do you reduce decades of memories, experiences, and relationships into something that can be spoken in less than 20 minutes? Before I wrote a single word, though, there was something else that I wasn't expecting. I was afraid. Not of speaking in front of people, not of writing. I was afraid of what I was going to remember. My dad and I loved each other very much, but we weren't always alike. We had our disagreements. We argued about politics. Sometimes, especially when I was a teenager, I thought he was hard on me. I honestly believed those arguments would be the memories that came rushing back, but they weren't. In fact, I hardly thought about them at all. Maybe part of that was because I was blessed with something that many people never get. About a month before my father passed away, my wife Jessica and I had the opportunity to go to Missouri and be with him one last time. We talked, we laughed, we hugged. Then about a month later, my stepmother called me and held the phone to his ear. He couldn't speak anymore, and all I could say was, "Dad, I love you, and I'm grateful for the life that you gave me." A few minutes later, after hanging up, my stepmother called back, and my dad was gone. I don't know if that's why those difficult memories faded into the background. I just know that they did. The disagreements were still part of our story. They just weren't the part that mattered the most. Instead, the memories that came back were the ones I never expected. I remembered sitting in the kitchen of his house in Coventry, Connecticut, building a little hockey rink out of constructs before we'd spend the afternoon playing floor hockey. I remembered counting bridges on the drive to my Nana's house. I remembered him giving me a hard time because everyone else ordered seafood and I ordered a burger at a seafood restaurant in Georgia, only for it to become the best burger I'd ever eaten. I remembered all the trips he took me on to zoos, wildlife parks, and game farms, and even having an opportunity to hold a baby lion cub on one of those zoo trips because of him. None of those moments seemed particularly important when they happened. They were just life. But somewhere along the way, those ordinary moments became priceless. And I think that's one of the lessons that grief has taught me. We spend so much of our lives waiting for the extraordinary moments that we forget it's usually the ordinary ones that shape us. The conversations, the traditions, the little routines, the afternoons that didn't seem important at the time. Those become the memories that we treasure. When I finally finished writing the eulogy, I thought I was done remembering my father. Instead, that's when I really started discovering him. People started telling me stories I'd never heard before. My stepmother reminded me of things I had long forgotten. Neighbors began sharing stories I'd never known. One neighbor told my stepmother that years ago he had asked Dad if he could borrow a pair of tin snips. Dad had 2 pairs. Instead of lending him one, he simply gave it to him. Then my stepmother told me something I had never known. When I was growing up, there was a time when my mom and stepdad were struggling financially. My stepdad was out of work and money was tight. And my parents did not get along. Not a little, not occasionally. For much of my childhood, they were at odds with one another. It would have been very easy for my dad to let that define their relationship, and a lot of people would have. Instead, he and my stepmother showed up at the house with a cooler full of food. Later, during another difficult season, he voluntarily increased his child support because he knew things were hard. Nobody asked him to. He just did it. What makes these stories so meaningful to me isn't simply that he helped, it's who he helped. He wasn't helping because he and my mom suddenly became best friends. He was helping because his son lived in that house. He was able to separate the conflict between adults from the responsibility he felt toward the people he loved. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't unusual for him. That was simply who he was. He spent his entire adult life working with people who had developmental disabilities. After he retired, he kept volunteering because those weren't just people he worked with. They were people he cared about. He and my stepmother opened their home to aging family members who needed them. He quietly helped neighbors. He bought school clothes for my sister, even though she wasn't related to him by blood. He loved my former girlfriend long after our relationship had ended, simply because she had become part of our family. Looking back, I don't think my father saw people in categories like family, friends, or strangers. He simply saw people. And when he saw someone who needed help, he helped. That realization has probably impacted me more than anything else over these last few weeks. Because there are probably dozens of stories about my father that I'll never hear. Acts of kindness that only 3 people know about. The person he helped, my father, and my stepmother. The rest of us will never know. And honestly, I think that's exactly how he wanted it. He didn't help people for recognition. He wasn't trying to build a reputation. He simply believed that if someone needed help and he could help, he did. My father didn't just leave behind a legacy. He left behind a legacy built on generosity. Not generosity measured by money, but generosity measured by compassion, measured by his time, by his quiet sacrifices, by opening his home, measured by simply showing up. That's the kind of generosity people remember. And I think that's why, even after he's gone, people are still telling stories about him. As I reflected on all of this, I realized something else. My dad and I disagreed on some pretty important things. He was a lifelong Yankees fan, and I followed my mother's side of the family and became a Red Sox fan. But we also debated on politics more times than I can count, oftentimes ending with a lot of shouting and some not so nice words. When it came to firearms and church safety, we saw the world very differently. If you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you probably have a pretty good idea where I stand. My dad stood somewhere else. But he never expected me to be a copy of him. One of the last conversations we had was about politics. He mentioned that I hadn't followed in his political footsteps. I smiled at him and I asked, "But isn't that what a child is supposed to do, make their own way in life?" He smiled and he agreed. Looking back now, I don't think we were really talking about politics. We were talking about a father watching his son become his own man. He also read the book that I wrote about building church safety ministries. To be honest, it wasn't his kind of book. He was a huge J.R.R. Tolkien fan. He wasn't particularly interested in the mechanics of building a church safety ministry, but he read it anyway. Not because of the subject, but because his son wrote it. And when he finished, he told me he liked it. Looking back now, I don't think he was proud because of the topic. I think he was proud because I'd found something I believed in enough to dedicate myself to it. As I kept replaying that final phone call in my mind, I remembered what I'd told him. I told him I was grateful for the life he gave me. At first, I thought I'd said everything I needed to say, but after writing the eulogy and hearing all these stories, after discovering parts of my father I'd never known, I realized there was one more thing I wish I had told him. I wish I had thanked him for the legacy he left me. Not a legacy of money, not a legacy of accomplishments. A legacy built on generosity. A legacy that taught me how to care about people, to show up, to quietly serve without expecting recognition. People sometimes ask me why I care so much about serving others, why I've devoted so much of my life to church safety, why I spend so much time writing the book and teaching and recording this podcast. The truth is, those values didn't begin when I joined a safety ministry. They began much earlier. They were shaped by watching a man who never stood behind a microphone, but quietly taught me every day what it looked like to love people. So if I could leave you with one thought today, it would simply be this. If your parents are still here, ask them about their lives. Ask them about the stories you've never heard. Don't wait until you're staring at a blank page, trying to summarize a lifetime before realizing how much you still have to learn. And if you've already lost someone you love, tell their stories. Because every time you tell one, their legacy continues to shape someone else. Thank you for letting me share a little bit about the man who had the greatest influence on the man behind the microphone.
Fear you are not welcome here.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sanctuary Peacemakers. If today's conversation added value, be sure to tune in next week as we continue equipping and encouraging those who serve and protect houses of worship. A special thanks to Haley Jones for granting permission to use her song Not Today as our introduction, and to Lesley Jones for allowing us to use the song Sound Mind as our outro music. As always, y'all stay safe and y'all stay blessed.